Dr. Edy MacDonald is the manager of the newly created social science team at DOC, having joined them in November of 2015. The team's new mandate is to use behavioural science to achieve greater conservation gains. Edy's also leading a challenge project, and I'm sure you'll enjoy her kōrero.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mel. I'm here today to talk about a nationally funded, National Science Challenge funded project, which I lead. Actually, it's not loaded right. Could you just reload it? Yep. So I'll just begin. Probably I take my inspiration for this talk that's crazy and ambitious. I take it from the most crazy and ambitious entity that I know, which is my family. Whānau are always the crazy ones. And there's the team of the project. So this is my family. And what I want to do is actually introduce you, more importantly, the person who's the most ambitious in my family, which is my mother, Jeanette. She has crazy hair. That's coiffed every Friday. It is 4 inches high. If you don't notice, she has a flower. She always wears every single day a flower. She coordinates her flowers with her jewelry, with her eye makeup, and her lipstick. So she is quite crazy, but she is quite wise. For 42 years, she was an educator. She retired last year at the age of 79. My mother, very wisely, has always told me, Edy, it's not what you say, but how you say that, how you say it. And I want you to take that little bit of wisdom from my crazy mother and understand that as we move forward to achieve this ambitious goal, which we just heard may or may not be achievable, of predator-free 2050, that it's not what we say, but how we say it. Because the new technologies that we're developing are not going to be realized unless the nation, i.e. the New Zealand public, allows us to. A lot of these technologies could possibly use genetic modified organisms. New Zealanders have a strong attitude towards that, and we don't know what they're going to allow us to do in the future. And if our scientists sit and crack it and come up with a solution in the laboratory, but if the New Zealand public isn't along, then we'll never be able to realize it. So you probably think it's going to be pretty easy, right? Just give them the facts, give them the information, tell them the economic argument, maybe get emotional about it. None of those work. In fact, the problem is you, the converted. The ones who've already drank the Kool-Aid, the ones who are really believing that we're going to get there. The problem is your values are not the values of the target audience. And so we need to understand the values of the target audience. And by the way, if you didn't realize it, people aren't rational. People do not make logical decisions. Again, you may think you're exceptional. You're a trained scientist. You think you're quite analytical. But I encourage you to look in the mirror, and I'm sure there's things in your life that are not very logical and rational. So although you feel you're analytical and rational when it comes to conservation, you cannot expect others to have that same value system. So you don't believe me? Let's talk about some examples. So cowrie dieback, as you know, is a problem. MPI ran a study, a survey of people living Coromandel North, and they found out 31% of the public was aware of the disease. You can imagine the ripple effect. Oh my God, nobody knows about cowrie dieback. So out came the bumper stickers, out came the posters, out came a new brand, a new website. They gave out little brushes to everybody to clean their boots. There was big billboards as you drove through Northland. Sounds good, right? So they reran the survey in 2016. Awareness almost doubled, more than doubled. Yay, we did it. Nope, not if you're me, who asked for the original data sets, went back because the very next question was, did you do anything about it? And there was no significant difference. Psychologists were not shocked by this. There's very little link between people's attitudes, awareness, and behavior change. So we spent a lot of money increasing awareness, but they're not doing anything about it. Still not convinced? Okay, let's go to the pest-free islands in Auckland, the Hauraki Gulf, in conjunction with Dock and Auckland Council. They've run 5 sets of surveys, talked to 3,000 boaters as they're launching their boats into the islands. So people, again, the converted, those people within Dock that were biologists said, well, maybe they don't know what a pest is. Maybe they don't know what an Argentine ant is, or that the rainbow skink shouldn't be on those islands. Or maybe they don't know which islands in the Hauraki Gulf are pest-free. So we ran those surveys, I did a meta-analysis, and the relationship between knowledge and checking for boats was almost non-existent. If you don't take anything home other than my mother, remember that knowledge and awareness doesn't lead to action. Okay, well, you say, well, pest-free and, carry dieback, those are old problems. We're going to try and get New Zealanders to know about novel technologies. So there's going to be a bell-shaped distribution of people's knowledge of it. So there will be a handful of people, mainly you guys, who will have a high awareness of it. There will be some people that will be vehemently against anything because they're just always against everything. But what we really will have is this opportunity of this middle group, this wide distribution of people that will be in the middle that won't have any knowledge of gene drive or Trojan female technology or anything. So if we just tell them the facts, that'll help, right? Wrong again, guys. In fact, the more often you take a group of people that don't know the facts, they have no knowledge of the topic you're talking about, and then you present them to the facts, it actually kicks them to be against that topic. And we've found that in other forms of novel technology. So synthetic biology, medical technology, nanotechnology, agricultural technology. So the facts can actually have a negative impact. Why is this? Well, humans think in 2 different ways. Psychologists have known this for about 30 years, but then a very famous behavioral economics gentleman came around and he wrote a book on it and won the Nobel Prize in it. And the reason being is that people actually process information in 2 ways. He calls it System 1 and System 2. System 2 is that rational aspect where you think, you get the facts, and you make a decision. Again, you think you're very rational. But what happens is that most of the time, we make decisions using System 1. This is your I wouldn't use the term irrational way to make decisions. You're using shortcuts, heuristics, rules of thumb, what other people are doing, and it's based on your values and your beliefs. The reality is you can only spend about 15% of your time using System 2. If you had to sit there and decide today what you wanted for lunch in a very detailed way, and you did that for every topic, your head would literally explode. Your neurons could not handle that type of processing. So most people are probably going to make their decision about acceptance or lack of acceptance of novel technologies using System 1. And so our research is going to look at both systems. So the first way we're going to do that is we're going to understand what New Zealanders value, about what their underlying values are towards novel technologies. So we're going to create a segmentation model. And this is not based on demographics. I don't want to know what Pakeha males at age 55 in Northland think. We'll collect the data that way so we can look at it, but demographics are very limiting, and they're also what's known as a masking variable. They're hiding underlying values. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look at their values, their belief systems, what do they do, who do they think, who do they listen to, who do they think is important and trustworthy. And so we're going to pulling from current literature that we know from the New Zealand context, generally based on 1080 and aerial spraying, but we're looking more widely at the general literature that's on public acceptance towards novel forms of technology, again, synthetic biology, medical techniques. We find that there's a whole bunch of attributes that lead to people's either acceptance or lack thereof acceptance, and I've listed some of them. So we're going to look at people's environmental identity, how much time they're out in nature, but what's really important is what's called psychographics. So what we're finding is that in other forms of novel technology, there's other attributes of individual peoples that seem to be more effective in predicting whether they're going to accept novel technologies. So if people believe more in the importance of themselves than the collective good, they tend to not want to accept novel forms of technologies. So basically, from a psychological perspective, we're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink and then see what bubbles up statistically, and we're going to look for these natural clumpings of people. And we're going to ask them their acceptance towards novel forms of technology. We're going to be a bit nebulous in this because the technology is still being developed. But what we're going to use is we're going to use a method called choice modeling, and we're going to compare and contrast people's scenarios, whether they accept A or B scenario, based on a couple of attributes. So we're going to compare the rats and the wasps, whether people would prefer a certain sort of technology that's focused at rats or versus wasps, and we picked those species for a specific reason. We're going to look at a new toxin, selective breeding that's non-genetic, and then something that is genetic. Again, being quite nebulous. So we're not going to talk about Trojan female or gene drive. We're going to be a bit nebulous on purpose. And then what's the outcome of this? Is it infertility or death? And is it ground or aerial distribution? Because aerial distribution seems to be a big barrier for novel technology. And so what you do is you offer people a choice, a scenario of A and B where you alternate those attributes, and then people choose whether they like A or they like B. And if you do this enough times, statistically what happens is it draws out all those attributes and gives you a list like this, where the top attribute is the most accepted and the bottom attribute is the least accepted. So it's a real clever way to try and find out what people will accept, rather than asking them on a scale of 1 to 7, how do you think about genetically modified wasps being released in your backyard? I wouldn't be surprised what people will say. So then what we're going to do is take those attributes that either bubble up to the top or bubble down to the bottom. We don't know what we're going to find, so that's why I can't say what we're going to do. And you end up with something like this. This is a hypothetical segmentation. So statistically, we'll let these segments fall out, and each segment will naturally clump together based on some shared values and beliefs. And that allows us to have a conversation with each one of those segments using their belief system. Because remember I said if we use facts, facts aren't going to shift people. We'll start framing the conversations with those segments based on their value system. And we will quite happily, and we're actually mandated by what we said to the National Science Challenge, to share this with everyone and anyone. So the next one, what we'll do is we'll delve in a little bit deeper and explore with focus groups some of the key stakeholders. This could be the beekeepers because of the wasps, farmers that are highly invested in conservation already, like around Taranaki, that would be quite good, or in Cape to City. We're quite interested in what urban dwellers think too, so it could be quite interesting. So we'll delve in to try and find the more nuances of what they believe towards these novel forms of technologies. And then the last one is what I really love to do, is once we've cracked it and we understand people, what they value and their belief system, now let's write some persuasive communication to nudge them for greater acceptance. And that's that idea on that bell-shaped curve. If you give them the facts, they're going to become more resistant to the novel technology. But my hypothesis is if we write persuasive communication utilizing their value system, that we can shift them to acceptance. Keep in mind, some people will never accept it, and that's actually really okay. So what does that look like? Let me run you through an example with cats, a project that I've done with some colleagues, and some of them are actually in the room today, around cats. So you guys know cats are a problem, so we ran a campaign in vet clinics, 45 vet clinics in 5 cities, to try and increase cat owners' behavior so that they could mitigate the impact of cats on our native species. So I won't go into the details, but using a common theoretical framework called the theory of planned behavior, we interviewed cat owners who came to the vet clinics, and what we found out is that there was a correlation between bringing their cat in at night. We used 22 different statements, and those that are in green were significantly correlated with bringing their cat in at night, and those that were in red were not. So from this, you can see that someone's behavior, bringing cats in at night, has 3 components: attitudes, norms, that is people who are influential forces, and perceived control. Do they have the logistics? What this can show you right away is that there's no significant relationship between people bringing their cats in at night and the impact on native wildlife. So any campaign that said bring your cat in at night to protect tuis would make no impact. And also look at who should not front the campaign. DOC, SPCA, Forest and Bird, and Gareth and Morgan should not front campaigns. So what we did is then we combined the attitudes, the cat safety message, and that your family likes it message with the spokespeople they'll listen to, which is the vet and a family member, and ran a campaign. So the first visitors to the vet clinics, this was the second round to the vet clinics, checked in, and they completed a survey. It was quite nebulous survey on cat animal welfare, so they didn't know what we were asking them. And then the student gave them this little handout. So on the front, you can see, you guys know Kevin Stafford, and Heidi's somewhere in the room, I think. So thank you, Heidi, for lending us Poncho to be, that's Poncho's the cat. And so you can see on that very front, it's keep Fluffy safe from cars, bring your cat in at night. That's just System 1. Now on the back was System 2. Those are the facts and information. So that was 1/3 of the vet clinics got that. 1/3 of the vet clinics got this, which was the child paired with the message that it's really nice. You have to say you like this one because that's my daughter. You probably recognize her from the earlier picture. And again, System 1 and System 2 were targeted both in this. And then what were the results? Here's the results. So 6 weeks later, we followed them up, called them and emailed them. Cat owners loved to respond, got an excellent response rate from them. Again, we hid the questions so they didn't know that it was just specifically about cats in at night. But you can see, we haven't done the stats yet, but from just the basics, you can see the cat child and the cat likes it was significant over the control. The control actually dropped, and that's probably because we were running into springtime, so the weather was getting better. So that's what a persuasive communication campaign looks like when you write it based on the value system of your target audience. So again, having and framing the conversation on their values is going to be critical. So there's going to be wider applications to this study. It's a 2-year study. By the end of next year, I hope to be having these conversations and being able to help facilitate the conversations about novel forms of technology. So just remember my mother and her hair, and if you're in San Francisco, I'm sure she would take you out to dinner. Just remember, it's not what we're going to say, but it's going to be about how we say it. Thank you.
Edy, love the talk. Thank you so much. And I'm just sort of interested in talking about the messaging that you've put forward. I mean, I know where I stand on this. I think any way we can get this message through is absolutely fantastic, and I'm prepared to run with. But I feel as though there's some ethical considerations in terms of trying to achieve conservation outcomes through providing messages which aren't necessarily founded in that conservation framing, and I just wonder if you have any comments on that or thoughts on that.
I have no problems with it.
Well, neither do
I get asked that question all the time. I have no problems because, as I showed you, there's no link to conservation attitudes and behavior. So even if we got 99% of the public to love conservation, they're still not going to do anything. So a psychologist knows that. We know that. So I'm not focusing on their attitudes. I'm focusing on their behaviors, and I have no ethical problems with that. By the way, it's done to us all the time. So.
What I'm wondering is that a lot of what we're talking about, certainly in the gene drive space, is going to be an international one.
Yep.
So is there a way to standardise the approach that you are doing with similar sorts of initiatives internationally?
Yes, most definitely. So there's the G-Bird Consortium. So I'm Dan Tompkins from Landcare, as you notice, is one of our colleagues and my collaborators. So we're working together just back from the Vertebrate Pest Congress over in Canberra last week, had conversations about doing that together. But I would assume that the value system of New Zealanders might be different and the context might be different than Australia and the US. So happy to have standardized measures and research, but the applications might be quite different because we're different context.
Is this post-truth, post-fact? Do the facts not matter anymore?
It's not about facts, because facts don't sway people. People, anti-vaxxers can find their own facts. It's about the value system. And I think this has been around for a long time. And if we have conversations based on people's value system, I think we may mitigate some of the post-truths problems. I can talk to you more about how they're doing it in climate change in the U.S.
If you've got more questions, Edy, you can harass her afterwards if you just stay here. One of the bonuses of coming to a session chaired by Māori is you get gifts.
Yay.
So from one crazy lady to the daughter of a crazy lady.
Thank you, ma'am.
Kia ora. Well, much paki paki.